So, welcome to this evening's webinar on funding applications. So, if you've joined us before, we have already done one session on funding applications, but this is going to be a session where we're going to deep dive into some applications that people have already sent us, people that are involved in the programme, and they've been sort of going through all the online modules and have also been going through some funding applications. So we have some real life examples, which our development manager, Fran, is going to go through. So over to you, Fran.
So the first thing before you start writing your application is to double and maybe triple check that you are eligible for that grant application. Believe it or not, there's still a large number of applications that funders receive where the application doesn't meet their published criteria. So if they've got an easy reason to reject you straight away, or they're not clear whether you do fit in with their guidelines, then they will use that as an excuse to probably not even look at your application further, unfortunately. So here's a few examples of how you understand whether you're going to fit in with a funder's criteria or not. So on the left-hand side, this is from the National Lottery Community Fund in the UK, where, for example, under this, they are quite clear about what kind of organisation you can be. They've got very broad definition, and what kind of income you need to have and what kind of board or committee. So these are kind of operational things that they're looking for. Some funders help you with an eligibility quiz. It doesn't always cover everything, but it does on the whole give you a really good idea if you are going to be eligible. That eligibility quiz is from Garfield Weston Foundation. And here's some kind of snapshots from another funder's website that give you some of the information that they can present, but it can be still tricky to know whether you're going to fit or not. In the top left, we've got the kind of areas that this funder says. They're very broad areas. On the right-hand side, kind of what kind of grants. So is it the kind of money that you're looking for? Are you the right size of organisation? Again, some of the operational things. But it can still be maybe quite hard to figure out if you're going to have a good enough chance, if you're going to fit in with their criteria, is it worth it? So another thing to do is to go on their charity commission website and look at their accounts and see who they donated to. So the snapshot on the bottom left is some of the information that is freely available in most trusts and foundations because they're charities too. And if you look at their accounts, it tells you who they've funded and how much. So it can give you another level of understanding what they mean by community, what they mean by health, for example. Who are they funding? And if in doubt, I would say you go and try and speak to the people at the funder, at the trust or foundation, because they would much rather they'd much rather have a quick phone call with you and you not apply rather than read an application that doesn't make sense. I've just seen there's a question about whether a CIC can apply. Again, that's really dependent on the criteria. Most will say what organisations they will or won't fund. So, for example, if you saw on the National Lottery one, they will fund a CIC. Most should say what they consider an eligible organisation. And if they don't, again, just a quick question to the funder to clarify whether you are eligible or not. Okay, so we're just going to skip ahead to the next part of today. But first of all, wanted to kind of cover one area which might seem a bit confusing, which is you're always creating your budget and finances in a spreadsheet, yet quite often you'll come across a funding application where it asks you to put it in a text box. So this might be a very simple budget that you've put together, and then you've been asked in the application, tell us your costs. So this is an example of a question from an application where it said, please provide a breakdown of how the grant is going to be spent. And they've asked for a budget breakdown, but they've given you a text box. So when a funder asks for a budget breakdown, they really are looking, the key word is breakdown. They do really want to see how you're going to spend their money, because most funders, that's what they're really that's what they're really interested in, kind of what you're doing and how you're going to spend their money. So how I tend to do it is how I've put kind of in the bottom of the slide. I will give them I will almost write out line by line of the budget and give them exactly what I've put in kind of each column in my budget and the calculation, so they can see very clearly how each number is exactly calculated to kind of as much detail as I guess is possible. You don't have to be really detailed, but it does help to be pretty sure of your numbers and for it to sound kind of convincing. I've also kind of would say here that for many kind of smaller funders, you don't necessarily have to say rent. You can also say words such as venue hire costs. And I think this links into a question that one of the participants had about how do you get kind of startup costs versus running costs. I would say that part of it is a little bit to do with, I guess, wording, because even although we, as Made in Hackney, have secured a venue with a long lease, we're still paying rent on it, but you can also call that venue hire costs. You might have utility costs in there. So I would say that if you don't have your own venue and you're looking to try and cover your startup costs, put, venue hire as a budget line. That's completely permissible. Most places are going to know that you're probably not going to have a venue, especially when you start out. And actually, weirdly, quite a lot of funders sometimes prefer to pay higher costs than rent costs, because rent they see as kind of an overhead cost, whereas venue hire costs, they see that as a very kind of direct cost to the beneficiaries. So I hope that's answered that question a little bit about how you can differentiate between kind of startup costs and running costs in your budget to a funder. I'm just going to check. There's another question. Yes, the application can include startup and running costs if there's enough budget in it and the funder allows those costs, then certainly you can have startup project costs and running project costs. I've definitely included both in an application before. Again, it really depends on that funder, how long their timeline is, how long is it going to start you to get up and running? Are they going to be happy with how much you can do within the time frame? But yes, some of them both can be eligible. Is there any more questions to Linda on this part, or can I move to the next example?
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we can move to the next. Thank you for the people who sent in their applications. So first caveat is, I just want to say thank you so much for sending your applications. I know I really kind of dread people reading my applications still, even though I've been doing them for years. And there's no such thing as a perfect application or a perfect fundraiser. So I hope tonight's just some kind of constructive feedback if I was reading this if I was perhaps the funder. So one of the questions that we get asked, or that we were asked, was, how to talk about your purpose and what level of detail. So for example, and this is an application, this is a question from a foundation, and they've asked you to please set out a summary of your project, including its purpose and objectives. I think writing an application is a little bit like exam questions. Hopefully, if the funder has spent some time on their application form, they should be telling you and guiding you what they want to see and where you're essentially going to get marks from them. So in this part, I've split it out into two. They've asked for, it's not the greatest wording, but they want a summary of the project, and they also want your purpose and objectives. So we need to cover all of this in this answer. So to start with, talking about purpose and objectives, even if it's a short application form, it's really important to write enough detail so that someone who doesn't know anything about your work can immediately kind of understand what you want to do and why. So in this answer, we've definitely got the purpose, but we could probably be more specific and clearer to this funder. And the number one thing to not forget is the why. We often get really bogged down, especially as a grant writer, I do, in talking about the what I'm going to do, where I'm going to do it. But the why is really should be the most important thing for us and for the person reading it. You know, why do you need to do this project? Why do you need to bring the community together? Why do children need to know about healthy food? What change do you want to see? I always try and make sure, especially in a short application, that each sentence has a point to it. So it's giving the reader another piece of information. You're not repeating yourself in each sentence. And then in this question, they ask for a summary of the project. So, and this is different from the purpose. The purpose is the kind of why, and the summary is almost the what. And a very simple formula for a summary is to follow the 5 W's: the who, what, when, where, and why. You don't have to do them in the order, of course, and you should have enough detail under each one so that somebody could almost take this and replicate your project to some degree if they wanted to. And obviously you might have already talked a little bit about why in your objectives. So you don't need to repeat yourself if you've already covered it. So if I was going to look at this and understand what are the 5 W's here, I might be setting out the first sentences. Maybe we will run how many cookery classes for children aged 7 to 15 years old. They're going to be held at one venue, which I'm not sure is clear, and also Tufnell Park Primary School. We need to include the when, which could be the months you hope to run them, potential times or days of the week, anything else you can give about that, how long they might last for. And each session will be for 15 to 20 children. And then it's often good to give the funder a kind of an idea of the scale of the project. So over how many sessions you think you're going to reach a total of how many children. So that's kind of a baseline, I guess, a foundation of an answer when any funder is asking for a summary, or they ask that question, what are you going to do with our money, or what do you want to do? Linda, did you have any questions?
No, thank you. That's great.
Okay, great. So I think we could go on to the next slide. So this is an example that I've pulled out of an application where there was a question that was asking about, I think it was literally asking what's the difference you're going to make, or what's this project going to do? And this is the section on impact. My kind of review of this answer would be that it's well answered, but you're doing yourself a little bit of disservice because your impact is almost a little bit buried. And what I mean by that is kind of almost the numbers that this funder is probably looking for. This funding application, I believe, is part of the kind of government disbursement of cost of living crisis funding. So that tells me they're going to be quite a numbers-based funder because they're trying to help as many people with the cost of living crisis as possible. So numbers rather than changes are probably going to be quite important to them because they're going to make an assumption that most people, that you are supporting people with the cost of living crisis. You've also talked about the impact in the second paragraph, but then it's a little bit hidden because it's combined with talking about another important thing, value for money, but it is kind of shadowing the impact and the change that you want to have on people. So another way of kind of thinking about how to make sure that we don't miss out anything and that we really do focus on impact is, well, first of all, I do love a bullet point and numbering system because it makes me, as a grant writer, especially for grants where I don't always have lots of word count, really get to the point and make sure I'm trying to hit as many points as possible. And it also, as I said before, tries to make sure each point is making a different point, and I'm not repeating myself. A way to kind of redo this could be that you kind of highlight at the start of your answer maybe the three or four main areas of impact you're going to be having on your community, and maybe what numbers you have to back that up. So I've given an example that you could start this question about, that you're going to be reducing food poverty and chances of people, including children, going hungry, and you're going to be providing 420 food parcels. And I've given some other examples here from kind of what I gathered that you were going to be doing as part of your work, all of which link to making a difference in the cost of living crisis. The feedback also is a really great thing to include. So I definitely wouldn't get rid of that. I would just kind of elevate and really hit home the actual changes you're going to make an impact on your community for this particular funder in the context of this question. I also noticed later down in the application, you had more impact data that you'd use to make some of your calculations for, I think, how many beneficiaries you're going to meet. And again, it seemed like there was also even more information you had on who you were helping and how, and that could have been maybe weaved into this answer. Does Gemma have any questions?
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Fran.
No problem. Yeah, so another question we had was, how do we talk about everything we do? We do lots of things, which I understand is a really big problem, especially when you're asked to talk about everything that you do. So I was looking at this answer in one of the applications we were sent. I'd say one of the bits that I noticed here is that although other parts of the application you talk about your work, I thought this is the part where you could elaborate more on why you. So what is the gap you're filling? Why should they pick you? What are you doing that others aren't? And another way of thinking about this is, what would happen if you were not able to run your services? So that is another kind of trick of how to answer these questions. So this question, how does your idea fit in with other local activities? It's actually a bit of a trick question, because they want you to both demonstrate that you have good community connections and that you work in partnership, but that your services are also really needed and you're filling a gap. And one way to kind of articulate this is to also flip it around and say, if we could not do this, then X would not happen. X people would not be able to do this, which can sometimes sound more convincing to a funder because they do understand better the gap that you're going to leave by not being able to do your work. So although this answer is really comprehensive, I think don't be scared to push how critical your work is. And this is not undermining how critical and vital everybody else's work is, but a funding application is a pitch for money. So you have to sell yourselves above and beyond. And unfortunately, that is the game. It would be really nice if the money could all be divided up equally between everyone and how everyone works. But unfortunately, it's that's not how it works. And so the people that make the best case for their work and can demonstrate it will end up with more funding. And then in terms of like, how do we say what we're doing succinctly? So I would say a way to start about that is to not start listing your work by all your activities out, is to try and group them. So for example, you might have seen for Made in Hackney, we've started supporting some of our work around the pillars of education, support and change. But you could also group your work by the main kind of outcome or impact pillars it's trying to have, like food poverty, food sustainability and health. And then you might find it more natural to talk about your work and think about it and articulate it by linking it to either the change it's having, or the broad area of work that it's really trying to do. And I think that can sometimes help to to start to reduce that kind of list of what can sometimes be a really long list of activities that we do, and to start kind of being able to articulate it in a much more succinct way that, especially a funder who is not going to be able to take on board all the details of all your activities, they really want to kind of know what broad areas of work you're involved in and what does that look like, kind of briefly. Did you have any questions, Gemma, on that?
No, really helpful feedback, and yeah, we're still trying to get our mission into 10 words or less. And after a few years now, we never seem to be able to do it. We definitely need this elevator pitch for many reasons. So incentive to go and sort it out.
Okay, so again, this was kind of talking a little bit about details. So this is, I think this is an application, maybe more of a local application. I think one to a local council, perhaps. What I've kind of highlighted here is, as I said a little bit before, the kind of exam question thinking when it comes to answering a question is to kind of follow their guidance. So they have asked to, they've kind of said outline your idea, but then they've given you hints. What do they want to see? Tell us what you want to do, and then what benefit it will bring. And then they've even said to the community, neighbourhood, and the people that live there. So the first bit I would answer is, tell us what to do. Tell us what you want to do. That's your summary of your project again. Again, we can follow the 5 W's that I talked about before: who, what, when, where, and why. I think don't be scared to be quite specific, or as specific as you can, and be very clear about the summary of what you want to do. The second part, again, they've said here, what benefit do you think it will bring? This is a little bit about the purpose. It's the why. Why are you doing this project? So this is quite a common theme for quite a lot of applications. What are you doing? And then why? And you need to be able to just say those two things quite distinctly and differently, because they're 2 different parts that a funder wants to see. So this application, this answer has kind of made a good start on the benefit part. They've signposted they really want you to talk about the community, neighbourhood, and the people. But you can go into more detail, I think. So firstly, don't be scared to reflect the language in the question in your answer. So again, it's a bit like an exam. The benefit to the community will be the benefit to the neighbourhood, the benefit to the people. Sometimes write it first of all to make sure you've answered it. And then you can make it sound more, I guess, pleasing to read. But think about making sure that you've ticked all their boxes, first of all, of what they want to answer. I think this application form didn't have lots of questions. It was kind of quite a short one. I think it was just a kind of expression of interest. So think about maybe weaving in perhaps the need that they haven't asked need in this question specifically, but the benefit to the community should normally reflect the needs that you've identified in the community. And sometimes it can help to, if they don't give you the opportunity in another question to talk about need, I would sometimes kind of weave it into one of these answers. So with a quick Google, I found that over 11,000 children in Trafford live in families with an income below 60% of median income, so is classified as living in poverty. So you can quite quickly find normally some information that really demonstrates the need of your project. And then for the benefits they ask, so you can either split this answer up by talking about the different benefits and how that will support the community, or you can talk about how the community, or you could split it up by community, neighbourhood, and people, and then talk about all the benefits to them. So you could talk about it either way, as long as you kind of build in, I think, all 3 elements into your answer, because they're obviously really interested, this funder, in the community part of what you're doing. So they really want to know how the benefits are going to ripple throughout the neighbourhood and the community. Did anyone have any questions on this application?
We've just had a little comment in the Q&A just from one of the participants here saying that in terms of terminology, saying address food insecurity rather than reduce food poverty, as they don't think their work reduces the poverty, even if you do provide the free food. So I suppose that's just about the nuanced language there, isn't it? Have you got anything to comment on that, Fran?
It depends what language that funder uses. So food poverty and food insecurity are used by different funders to, I guess, interchangeably a little bit. And then secondly, I guess it's, being true to what you feel is a more accurate description of the impact that you're going to be having. Yes, for some of our activities, we talk about reducing food poverty because we are providing meals directly to households. Other times we are talking about reducing chances of food insecurity because we're talking more about kind of resilience building and supporting people before they get to the point of, perhaps having food poverty. So I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer as long as you can justify why you're using the words that you're using and that the funder is going to understand what you mean and how it relates to your how it's relating to the work that you're applying for.
So I have a question on that one, Fran. This was a very short form that I filled, and I just some of the applications that they have only a form, and you fill the form, but at the end of the form they asked if you have any evidence or any material that you can support this application. They want you to attach to the form. Do you think is it always handy to prepare a PDF with some photos and always attach to an application? Would it be more successful?
I don't know about the kind of official chances of success, but I would say that if a funder gives you the opportunity to give them more information, then go for it, especially something that brings it to life. If you're given a very short application form and the questions are quite dry, then being able to submit something that's full of colourful photos, I think is, you've got to remember that the other person reading this is a human being as well, and they are going to respond to language, they're going to respond to photos, and they're going to respond emotionally to what you've written. Obviously, the job of a good person that's going through these, they're supposed to be able to be kind of not biased, which is why some of the the processes should be fair. But somebody with really kind of photos that bring something to life, I think yes, you should definitely submit more information if a funder.
I ask this because I registered as a CIC just a couple of months ago, and basically I'm like a ghost. I don't have any team, and they asked me to put the social media accounts and the website and everything. But when they check over there, I don't have a team. I don't have. About Us is empty. So do I have to, I don't know, just take photos of my friends and just upload on my website and pretend like they are the volunteers? Today, don't you think, are they going to support me? Because I'm just thinking because I'm quite new.
Yes.
Would they going to give me some money, or because they know that you have to have a team to do such things? So even on the website, do you have to just show that you're a team, that you could do such things, because you don't have any evidence, you're a new CIC or charity?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, there's definitely grants out there, which I hope this one is, where you can be honest that you're new. And there are funds set up for kind of new organizations, but I understand that can still be tricky when you're applying for your very, very first grant and you are still very new, because they're still dubious of you. I would never say that you would make stuff up. I would say, firstly, kind of find the right funder, check with that funder, I'm new, can I apply? But what you need to make more of is I think in your case, your experience and skills that you already have. You have already done, you've already run cookery classes, for example. You have a photo from yourself teaching at Made in Hackney. You don't have to label, and you can label that photo, you know, a cookery class with Made in Hackney. You know, you don't have to lie about what it is. But I think if you think about it, you might have slightly more, I hope, kind of evidence out there of what this cookery class might look like. You might have an example flyer that you could create, a kind of a recipe perhaps that you've done. So there might be some things that you've got that do show that you are ready to do this project, even if you've never received funding before.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
One thing that we suggest in the Global Plant Kitchens modules is also to do a little trial event. So you could host a cooking class and get participants, like people that you know, to take part, and you run it through it like a class, and you can get feedback from them. And maybe that's something in terms of, you know, getting a little bit of evidence that isn't like completely falsified, but it is sort of saying feedback on how the class went, or things that people learned and how it benefited them.
So this is the last one that we're looking at today. So again, this is, I know I'm going to keep on repeating myself, but the exam question scenario again. So when they give you a kind of a guideline of 200 words or so, on the whole, that gives you an idea of how much information they're looking for. I'm not saying you need to write the whole 200 words. And some funders will, there is the odd occasion where they have very high word counts and you really don't have, you know, even half as much of that word count to say. But if it's a short application form and this is one of the kind of questions, I would say follow the word count and try and fill it up, because it's only 200 words. So in this question, they want to know how would this project support the cost of living crisis? So I think, again, don't be afraid to repeat. I know I've said don't repeat yourself, but you can repeat yourself a little bit, or you can signpost people to the question above if, you know, you've talked about it quite clearly, maybe in the question above, and then use this space to kind of carry on your argument. In this point, you know, it might be that, you know, that you're reducing the impact of food insecurity, or that you're building resilience through cookery classes. Another thing to do is to check their strategy. So I quickly looked at I found a strategy for Trafford, and it says that they want to support voluntary and community groups who offer food provision to people experiencing poverty and who provide opportunities to learn cooking skills. So this is a really important piece of information to reflect back at this funder, that your application is literally meeting one of their strategy points, which is what the council's supposed to be doing. And perhaps you already knew this when you wrote this, but don't be afraid to point that out to them and link that back into how you're supporting your community through the cost of living crisis, because cost of living is obviously directly linked to poverty. And this strategy quite clearly says that they believe cooking skills are important to alleviating poverty. And then think about how else might you be supporting your community through it. Are they getting a free meal at the end of the session? Are they getting portions to take away? Are you giving them resources on budget cooking or where to shop locally on a budget? And also you're providing a free activity, because isolation is a big problem during the cost of living. So I think don't undersell what you might be doing to support your community or the benefits you might be having, because you're probably not just having one benefit, you're probably having multiple benefits. And it can be, it's a bit of a way to kind of start learning to talk about your work in this way and thinking about all those benefits. And it does come kind of more easily as you have more practice, but it also comes to you as you speak to more people that come to your classes and what you hear them say to you about the benefit that you've had to them. And I think my last point is just, you know, bullet points. As someone writing grant applications, bullet points can be really helpful to make sure that you're getting lots of information in there, but also keeping your answers to the point. So just a kind of little summary. We've talked through some of these, but also things to kind of check when you're going through your application. Is it really clear what you do and why? And again, a big question, big point on the why. Is it clear what you want money for? So that can often be in the budget, or being really clear on the impact and the number of people you're going to reach. Again, is the difference that you're going to make, your outcomes and impact, really clear? Have you linked that to the need that's been that either the funder really wants to meet or is important for your local area? Have you got the right amount of detail for what that funder's looking for? Could they go and tell someone else they've never met what your charity or your organisation does without having done anything apart from read your application? And then the final two things, which we haven't got kind of practical examples of, which is have you missed anything? So I think here we were talking a little bit about kind of clarity of language, making sure that anyone can understand your application, and that if you gave it to a friend, and they would be able to understand exactly what you do, and even giving your application to someone else to read it in your organisation or even externally can be a really helpful way to understand whether you've been clear enough. And then the last bullet point is something that you're always kind of told to do, which is kind of, make your application sound interesting and sparkle. And I would say that it is really important, but it can be really tricky, because sometimes you're so focused on word count or even character counts, fitting everything into the application, let alone with the deadline looming up, that trying to make it sound kind of beautiful, especially if you're not a confident writer, can be tricky. What I would say is write from write how it feels comfortable to you to write. Don't try and copy someone else's way of writing, and write from your heart. There's lots of room in applications to include lots of facts and figures and need and outputs and impact, while still writing from the heart and really getting across the kind of the passion you have for your project. So I think that's a skill that comes with time, and I'm not always great at it, but it's really comfortable. It can feel quite comfortable writing an application when you start to find more of your voice and how you like to talk about your organisation in a way that really kind of makes you passionate about it and gives you maybe a chill down your spine about why this is so important to you.
One question in here about tight word counts. Would you write notes rather than full flowery sentences? And I suppose I would add to that, how do you make it sparkle if you are doing?
I don't know if anyone here has done postcode, what's it called now? Postcode Society application. It is something that I think a lot of this group could look at. They have incredibly tight, not just word counts, but character counts. So that means letters and spaces. And you can't make it sparkle if you're dealing with, tell me what you want to do in 500 characters or less. That's trying to make like a tweet sparkle. And that is that's almost like another skill, which is trying to hit everything they want to read in so few characters. It's probably one of the toughest application forms in some ways, because the character count is so little, and you have to sacrifice any words that are not getting to the point, unfortunately, and you have to change "and" to ampersands just to try and answer it.
Great. Wow, thank you. I feel that everyone will have learned so much from all of that. I really appreciate the deep dive into those 3 applications. So I'll just wrap up there. And yeah, just if you're looking for more content, more webinars, or more recorded content from us, keep an eye on our newsletter, where we'll be sort of making announcements as to what we have planned next. And if you don't sign up for the newsletter, just go to globalplantkitchens.org and we send out monthly updates on this type of thing, but a lot more relevant activities around the Global Plant Kitchens project. So thank you, and thank you again, Fran, and hope to be able to support you all again sometime soon.